And I know, and you all know, that I'll be working very hard to find a responsible agreement, and I sincerely hope that we have a sufficient number in the House that will join me in that, and let's get this done. Madam President, with that, I will yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senator from Iowa.
As the further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, I just, as the chair of the Health Committee, that great committee on which the occupant of the chair also sits, a valuable member of that committee, I just got informed by our staff that as of this last hour, over 2.8 million people have gone on healthcare.gov to get information about and to sign up for the Affordable Care Act. 2.8 million people. In fact, so many that at different places in the country, the websites kind of froze up. Well, then I heard that some of my Republican friends were saying, see, we told you it wasn't ready. The websites aren't working right. Now, if very few people had signed up, they'd have said, see, we told you. No one's going to sign up for it. So they're trying to have it both ways. I mean, people, 2.8 million Americans on the first day going on healthcare.gov to get this information and, again, to sign up. By tomorrow, we'll have some data and some statistics on how many people actually not only inquired, but are actually signing up on the websites. We'll have some more information on that tomorrow. But obviously the interest is there, which we knew it would be. And again, as our leader Reid pointed out today, that years ago he was telling a story about how he went out and visited Google in California, and they were telling him that when they first started Google, they didn't realize how many people were going to be using it, and they kept crashing and freezing up. And so they had glitches of their own. Well, yeah, there's some glitches in this system because a lot of people are coming on and wanting the information and wanting to sign up. That's the good news. And it's what we always knew. We knew that when we passed the Affordable Care Act, that if we approached it in a diligent, forthright way, but cautiously and in an orderly manner, that it would work. And that's why it's taken us, what, almost 3 years to get to this point, because we wanted to do it right. We wanted to do it in a way that would work. And I think today is a remarkable day in the history of our country, in that we are now going to have affordable health care insurance for every American that can't be taken away if you get sick. They can't deny it to a family because somebody had a pre-existing condition. Everyone will have health care insurance that will be affordable, can't be taken away, and we'll have a whole new suite of preventative care measures and wellness programs to keep people healthy and to prevent illness in the first place. So we have turned the corner on bringing health care to every American, regardless of their health status, regardless of their economic status, regardless of whether they have a job or don't have a job, no matter how old, no matter how young, no matter the circumstances, everyone will be able to be covered by health care insurance. I guess I might say that it's also another red letter day because of the close down of the government. So here we have the House of Representatives that, again, will not even put the bill on the floor of the House for a vote that will keep the government running. I mean, think about that. They won't even put it on the floor for a vote. Because you know why? They know that if they put it on the floor, they'll get enough Republicans and enough Democrats to vote for it that it'll pass. So the Tea Party extremists in the House, rather than bringing that bill, which is sitting there, it's sitting there, rather than putting it on the floor, they could pass it tonight, government will be back in business tomorrow. No, now they're trying to deal and make this little deal, and first it was defund Obamacare, delay Obamacare. Now they've got something they're doing on the House floor now. They're going to fund little, teeny little programs. I mean, it's nonsense. This is nonsense. This is not worthy of a great country. I had a nice conversation with our Secretary of State this morning, Secretary Kerry, and not necessarily just about this, but of course we talked about the government shutdown. And I asked him, I said, Secretary, I said, you're close to this. How is this playing in other countries? And Secretary Kerry said to me, he said, it's painful for us in the State Department, representing the government of the United States in a nonpartisan way, and to have other countries sort of look at us like and scratch their heads and wonder why we're doing things like this. And so he was just pained, not for himself, but I think for all of his wonderful diplomats or ambassadors all around the world representing our country and what they must have to go through to have other countries see what we're doing and question our judgment. Well, that's what the Tea Party people are doing. They are really driving this country down. It's very dangerous what they're doing. It's an ideologically driven obstructionism. It's taken a dangerous turn. Again, despite the efforts to pass a continuing resolution to fund the government, the House Republicans have shut down the government because we will not submit to defunding or delaying Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, whichever you call it. Well, again, it seems like we see this crisis differently. I was reading a newspaper report that one member of the House Republican caucus said with a big smile, quote, "We're very excited. It's exactly what we wanted, and we got it." This is exactly what they wanted? A government shutdown, and they got it? We're excited, she said. The article also notes the reaction of another representative who reportedly said, "It's wonderful. We're 100% united." Again, another Tea Party Republican. So what are they excited about? The hundreds of thousands of federal workers who are on furlough today? The closed monuments in the national parks? The delayed veterans benefits and Social Security investigations? The loss of economic activity and jobs? Is that what excites them? You know, after more than 3 decades here in Washington, it's difficult to shock me, but this sheer cynicism, the fundamental lack of decency that we're witnessing right now is nothing short of breathtaking. Now, again, as I understand it, this is just the first step. Now, the Tea Party Republicans continue to threaten that if the Senate and President Obama don't submit to their demands, they'll create another economic crisis by causing our country to default on the national debt in the middle of the month. So who pays the price for this recklessness?
Would the Senator yield for a question?
I'd be delighted to yield to my friend from Illinois.
The Senator from Iowa has the special responsibility of the Authorizing and Appropriating Committee that deals with health and education, the National Institutes of Health, and so he understands medical research better than most. I'm sure he's aware now that the junior senator from Texas, Senator Cruz, is making a list of those agencies of government which he and the Tea Party Republicans believe should be reopened.
Yeah.
The first cut on that list includes the Veterans Administration, but it doesn't include the 564,000 federal employees who are also veterans, a fourth of whom are disabled veterans.
Right.
He has included the National Park Service because of the embarrassment of international visitors coming to the Statue of Liberty and finding it closed, and he's included the District of Columbia. But I note that he has not included the National Institutes of Health, and I wonder if the senator from Iowa has read the Wall Street Journal article today. It says as follows, and I quote, "At the National Institutes of Health, nearly three-quarters of the staff were furloughed today. One result, Director Francis Collins said about 200 patients who otherwise would be admitted to the NIH Clinical Center for Clinical Trials each week will be turned away. This includes about 30 children, most of them cancer patients, who will be turned away at the National Institute of Health." My question is this: would the senator from Iowa join me in writing a letter to the junior senator from Texas and the Tea Party Republicans begging them to include the National Institutes of Health on their list of agencies that they may consider reopening?
Well, I say to my friend from Illinois, I would be delighted to get on that letter because I'm acutely aware of what's happening at NIH. But I might also tell my friend from Illinois that I'd also like to include the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
We shouldn't push our luck with the junior senator from Texas.
But I must say to my friend that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention is out there keeping diseases from spreading, containing them where they break out, putting in prevention measures all over this country. They, too, are furloughing people. Just think what would happen if, God forbid, some virulent bacteria or virus were to break out, and they have, as you know, CDC is very good at containment. They know how to handle situations. What if they don't have the people to do that?
Well, I would just say to the senator from Iowa, we'd better not push our luck asking for both the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control from Senator Cruz. In all honesty, we're not sending any letters. This is reckless and irresponsible. To threaten the lives of people going for clinical trials at the National Institutes of Health, to quote from a distant past in this chamber, in this Congress, have they no shame? Have they no shame to shut down the government of the United States of America, endangering the lives of individuals over a political temper tantrum?
Well, I say to my friend, it is shameful. It is not befitting a great nation. I mean, maybe they'd like us to be a third world country. But, you know, I see this, and I don't understand. You're right, where is their shame? But where is their sense of responsibility? Where is their sense of being responsible to the people of this country, to have a government that works, to protect them, to keep them healthy, that does the medical research that the senator spoke about? But I see that, and I don't understand why they don't grasp the kind of damage that they're doing to our country. I just don't understand it.
I would say to the senator from Iowa, and yield the floor back to him, and I see that senator from New Hampshire waiting. Our last best hope in this debate is that moderate Republicans will step up and say enough. This is not what the Republican Party is about. This is not what America should be about. We need to be solving these problems on a bipartisan basis. If enough moderate Republicans would come to that empty side of the floor, which we've been witnessing all day today, and speak out, we could bring an end to this national embarrassment. I thank the senator from Iowa.
I thank the senator for his input and his questions, and I think the senator has highlighted just the kind of situation that just begs credulity. I mean, people around this country must wonder, have we taken all leave of our senses here? Well, people say you should sit down and negotiate. And we are always willing to negotiate. We're always willing to talk about things. But when the Tea Party Republicans in the House say, no, we won't even keep the government open unless we defund Obamacare, which is the law of the land, that's trying to nullify a law by holding a gun at our heads and saying we're going to shut down the government unless you get rid of the law. Not a bill, not a proposal before us, but the law of the land upheld by the Supreme Court. This is not the way to govern. It's a way to take hostages, maybe. It's a way to commit blackmail, but it's not the way to run a government. So, yes, I hope that the moderate Republicans, and believe me, there are a lot of good moderate Republicans. I deal on my own committee, good people who work together, and we work together to get bills passed and to get them out of our committee. We just need them to say to the Tea Party that, no, you're wrong. This is not good for us, it's not good for the country, and it's not good for the Republican Party either. Well, Madam President, I'll have more to say about this later and also tomorrow when I will bring some more figures to the floor on how many more people are excited about the Affordable Care Act and are going to healthcare.gov. I might, if I might, just take one extra minute here to say that I was down at the World War II Memorial this morning to greet some Iowans who were coming in on an honor flight, and I saw the barricade up there. And I talked to one of the park officers, and I said, this doesn't make sense. I said, it doesn't really make sense because it's open. I've come down there at midnight at night and walked around. It's out in the open. I could understand it if it was a building and where you had to go through a device and, you know, security. I can understand that because the government is shut down. But then I guess some buses came from Mississippi. I had to leave before the Iowans could arrive, and they went behind the barrier. They went in, and fine, and everybody was fine. I heard that this afternoon that the park police came down and now are moving people out again and putting the barricades up. I mean, why are there barricades on the Jefferson Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, the World War II Memorial, Vietnam Memorial? I don't know, maybe. Any of those where people walk around. I mean, it doesn't make sense to put up barricades around these. So while this whole shutdown of government is nonsense, I don't think we ought to respond to nonsense with more nonsense. And so I call upon the Park Service and the Department of Interior on those instances where it's open 24 hours a day, like the World War II Memorial or the Korean War Memorial or Lincoln, Jefferson monuments. Why put up the barricades? People are there, they go there 24 hours a day. So this doesn't make sense. And I hope by tomorrow that whoever put out those orders to put those barricades up will have those orders superseded by someone higher up and get those barricades down. As I said, I can understand if it's a building where you have to have security, where you have to have guards and machines and equipment. I understand that with the government shutdown, yes, that's not accessible. But for something that's open, like those monuments where people wander in and out 24 hours a day, it makes no sense to put up barricades. And I call upon the Park Service to get rid of those barricades. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Madam President, I came to join my colleagues on the floor this afternoon to talk about and to call on our colleagues in the House, those Republicans who have been taking this irresponsible action, to stop what they're doing and help us resolve this government shutdown. We are involved in a completely manufactured shutdown of our government. This is something that didn't have to happen. Right now, there is a majority in the House ready to pass bill to keep our government open, to start it back up again, to end this crisis. But here we are. We're in the midst of the first government shutdown in 17 years because a small minority of the minority party in the other house is holding this government hostage so it can pursue its agenda of trying to end the Affordable Care Act. I don't know why they don't want to make sure that people in this country can get access to health care. And I'm not going to talk about that this evening. But this is irresponsible, and we're already seeing the effects of this crisis in New Hampshire and across the country. We've got thousands of federal employees in my state of New Hampshire who could face furloughs. That includes workers at our Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. Those folks are from Maine and New Hampshire, but they're looking at furloughs. We've already heard from over 300 civilian technicians for the National Guard in New Hampshire who've been notified that they're going to be furloughed. And I've started hearing from constituents whose lives are affected by our inability here in Washington to address keeping this government open. I heard from one of my constituents in Portsmouth, a man named Robert Cody. He writes, "Dear Senator Shaheen, please do not allow a government shutdown to occur. The consequences to individuals and the economy will be catastrophic." He goes on to say, "To put this on personal terms, my daughter just finished graduate school and began work as a consulting doctor at a Veterans Administration hospital, providing care to wounded veterans. If a shutdown occurs, she will lose her job and be faced with crushing student loan debt and no way to pay back the loans or her living expenses. The veterans who will be deprived of her care will be victims of the shutdown as well. Her situation is just one of many." Boy, Robert, you're certainly right about that. Hard-working individuals, as Robert says, must not be forced to suffer to make a political point. He goes on to say, "Please do the right thing. The consequences to the economy and unemployment will be far-reaching, and you will be blamed if you contribute to this looming disaster." You know, Robert, I couldn't agree more with what you've said. I think we need to work together. We need to try and avoid any further harm to people who depend not only on the jobs, the people who are going to be laid off, but also those people who benefit from the services that the federal government provides. You know, salaries for our federal workers aren't just important for them and their families. They're also critical to their local economies. When hardworking New Hampshire citizens aren't able to get their paychecks, they stop making their mortgage payments, they stop paying their utility bills, they stop shopping at local stores. And that's what we're going to see if this shutdown continues. It will inflict serious consequences on the economy. New Small Business Administration loans are not being originated. SBA loans are critical for job creation in New Hampshire. Our small businesses represent 96% of all employers. In 2012, SBA helped 630 small businesses in New Hampshire get access to over $130 million in loans. Now, because of this shutdown, businesses are not going to have access to those loans. The Federal Housing Administration loans are slowing. Our housing market has really just begun to recover, but it's still fragile. And now, because of the shutdown, we're going to be holding up home sales because much of the FHA's staff are furloughed. And of course, this is terrible timing for the tourism industry in New Hampshire. We're just beginning our fall foliage season. It's a spectacular time to travel around New Hampshire this fall. We have tourists who come from all over the world who spend money in our local restaurants, who stay at our hotels, and visit our attractions. And many of our small businesses rely on this time of the year to provide the revenue they need to continue operating all year long. And we know that those tourists who come from overseas stay longer and they spend more money. But if the shutdown in government means that we're going to be turning away many of those customers, applications for visas are going to come to a halt. According to the Congressional Research Service, during the 1995-96 shutdowns, approximately 20,000 to 30,000 applications by foreigners for visas went unprocessed each day. And U.S. tourism industries, the airlines, the hotels, the restaurants, all of the affiliated businesses who depend on tourism lost millions of dollars. We also have a visa center in New Hampshire that works on those visas. They're shut down as part of this government closure. We have a lot of small businesses in New Hampshire and across the country who rely on federal contracts as they grow and create new jobs. I talked to one of those small business owners today, a man named Lou Altman with Globophone. I've known Lou for a long time. He's worked in New Hampshire and around the world. He had called to express his deep frustration about our failing to pass a continuing resolution to keep this government open. Globophone's satellite phone technology helped federal agencies meet critical needs in addition to providing technology for many developing countries. But with the shutdown, everything's up in the air for Globophone. They're not certain what this means for their government contracts. As a result, their cash flows are uncertain. Since their cash flows are uncertain, their line of credit with the bank is uncertain. I don't blame Lou for being frustrated, for wanting to know why we can't work together to get this done. I would say that to my colleagues in the House. You can't take this government hostage and expect that we're going to be able to negotiate. This government shutdown is bad for our economy, it's bad for middle-class families, it's bad for our country. And unfortunately, what we've seen this week is that some have decided that they want to inflict another manufactured crisis as a tactic to prevent health care reform from going into effect. Well, the people that I talk to in New Hampshire don't think this is a good approach. They know that a government shutdown is serious, that it has consequences for our economy and jobs, and considering that impact, it's no surprise that economists have forecast that our failure to deal with this crisis will have a significant impact on our economy. Even a 3- or 4-day shutdown could slow growth by 0.2%, according to economist Mark Zandi, and an extended shutdown could reduce growth by 1.4%. So holding the economy and critical services hostage to score political points is reckless and it's irresponsible. With the economy showing signs of improvement, this is the last thing we should be doing. And you know, it doesn't have to be this way. I was a governor for 3 terms. 2 of those terms, the other party controlled both chambers of our legislature. But we were always able to enact a budget before the fiscal year ended. We had a lot of differences along the way, but both sides understood that in order to reach an agreement, in order to pass a budget, in order to keep government operating, we had to compromise. It would have been impossible to imagine the New Hampshire legislature not getting a budget to my desk because they wanted to play political games, or that they would have sent me a budget that they knew I was going to veto. Well, this Congress can certainly do better, and we must do better. My colleagues have pointed out that the Senate, in taking up the bill to keep the government funded, the continuing resolution, agreed to accept the dollar amounts that the House wanted us to. So we compromised on this continuing resolution, and what we saw for our willingness to do that was the House decided they were going to put all kinds of amendments on this bill to keep it from getting passed. Well, I certainly hope that we can pass this bill, that the House will take it up. All the Speaker needs to do is to take up the clean bill that the Senate sent him, because there are the votes to pass it. If he's so sure that the votes aren't there, then let people vote on it and see what happens. But we know that's not the case. We know that the votes are there to pass this bill, and that because he's being held hostage to a small minority in the Republican caucus, this government is shut down, and tens of thousands of people across the country are experiencing difficulties as a result. Well, Madam President, I certainly hope that we're going to see some action soon. I'm going to continue to work for that, and I'm sure all of us in the Senate will try and see something get done so we can reopen this government.
Madam President.
Senator from Vermont.
Thank you. And let me concur with much of what my colleague, Senator Shaheen, has just said. But let me begin by doing something that we don't do enough, I think, and that is to say thank you to the 2 million civilians and 1.4 million men and women in the military of these states, including some 5,000 in my own state of Vermont. So we have 2 million civilians who are working for the federal government and 1.4 million men and women in the military. We owe them a deep debt of gratitude. And the work that they do is enormously important for our country. They work to make sure that our drinking water and the air that we breathe is safe. It is not an accident that in many parts of this country, the air that people are breathing, that our kids are breathing, is a lot cleaner than it used to be. It took a lot of work to make that happen, and we thank them for that. We have customs people today patrolling our borders, and we thank them for their work. We have federal workers who protect the health and safety of working people all over the country. We have federal workers who are working today educating kids with special needs. We have federal employees who provide food to low-income pregnant women, infants, children, and senior citizens. We have federal employees today who are working in VA hospitals, and we have nurses there and many other staff doing a great job for our veterans. We have federal employees who make sure that children receive needed care and services so that their parents can go to work. They repair our roads and bridges, dams, culverts, sewers, and schools. They sweep the floors. They clean our bathrooms and make sure that the buildings we work in are not infested. Americans who work for the federal government are part of the backbone of this country, and I personally thank them for what they do. But it is no secret that in recent years there has been a huge assault against the federal workforce. For the past 3 years, the pay of federal workers has been frozen at a time when the costs that they are incurring in terms of gasoline, heating oil, prescription drugs, everything else has been going up, but their pay has been level. And now, as a thank you for all of the work that federal employees do here in Washington and Vermont, Massachusetts, all over this country, our thank you to them has been to shut down the government and to tell some 800,000 federal employees, these are single moms trying to raise kids, these are proud people, civilians in the military, people in our National Guards, these are people who are doing important work, who have families to raise, who are dedicated to their jobs, and we're saying, sorry, you have to go home. And they're going home, and they're not even sure whether they are going to be paid or when they are going to be paid. So you're looking at tens of thousands of lives that are being radically disrupted because of this shutdown. I can tell you, Madam President, that in Vermont we are very proud of the Vermont National Guard. Vermont National Guard men and women served very heavily and bravely in Iraq and Afghanistan. They helped us when we had this terrible Irene floods a few years ago. and the thank you that the Vermont National Guard is getting today, and this is true all over the country, is that in Vermont some 450 workers at the Vermont National Guard are going to be furloughed. And I know many of these people, they are good people, they are hardworking people, they just don't deserve this type of behavior from the federal government. And this affects people from all over the state, people who are trying to get homes, people who are trying to start businesses. And that's not something that should be happening. Madam President, let me just very briefly explain the dynamic of what's going on right here. And it is not complicated. The Republicans in the House are dominated by a relatively small group of right-wing extremists. And what the Speaker there has said is that instead of bringing the bill that we passed here in the Senate, what's called a clean CR, that will continue funding the government, instead of putting that bill on the floor of the House and allowing the entire 435 members of the House to vote on that bill, what he has done is said to the House Republicans, okay, what do you want? And the extreme right wing has dominated that, and what they have said is, we want to defund Obamacare. And that's the only legislation you, Mr. Speaker, can bring to the floor of the House. And this is a moment of enormous importance for the Speaker of the House. And he has to determine whether he is the Speaker of the Republican Party or the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, whether he's going to be dominated by a minority of one party in one part of the government, or that he will allow the entire House to vote. And what many observers have made clear is if he puts that bill on the floor, it will pass and the government will reopen. And I hope that he will do that. Now, my political views, my progressive political views are pretty well known. My views on this issue are well known in Vermont, maybe elsewhere in the country. But what I want to do, Madam President, is very briefly tell you what some Republicans are saying. People who are not right-wing extremists, people who, in fact, who have very strong disagreements with the Affordable Care Act, but understand that you do not hold the American people hostage, you do not blackmail the government in order to get your way. So this is not Bernie Sanders talking. These are conservative Republicans, but people who are not right-wing extremists. Let me just quote some of my colleagues. These are the public statements that they have made. Saxby Chambliss, Republican senator from Georgia, this is what he says. Quote, I'd love to defund Obamacare too, but shutting down the government and playing into the hands of the president politically is not the right thing to do. Plus, it's going to do great harm to the American people if we pursue that course. We've been there. It didn't work. End of quote. Saxby Chambliss, Republican. Senator Dan Coates, Republican, Indiana, quote, here's the hard truth. President Obama will not overturn his signature legislation so long as he is president and the Democrats have control of the Senate. Along with these political realities, refusing to pass legislation to keep the government funded will not stop Obamacare from going into effect. End of quote. Senator Dan Coates, Republican. Senator Tom Coburn, Republican, Oklahoma, quote, it's not an achievable strategy. It's creating the false impression that you can do something when you can't, and it's dishonest. End of quote. Republican Senator Tom Coburn. Republican Senator Bob Corker, Tennessee. The Washington Post reports that Corker compared shutting down the government to a way that buffalo were slaughtered in the Old West. Quote, I know when you get led into a box canyon what that means. Box canyon, here we come. End of quote. Representative Peter King, Republican, New York, quote, we should not be closing down the government under any circumstances. That doesn't work, it's wrong, and you know, Obamacare passed. We have to try to defund it, we have to try to find ways to repeal it, but the fact is we shouldn't be using it as a threat to shut down the government. End of quote. Republican Senator Orrin Hatch, Utah, quote, my personal belief is the only way to get rid of Obamacare is to be intelligent and smart about it and gradually just work on it, work it through. To expect the government to shut down is not the way to do it. End of quote. Mark Kirk, Senator, Republican from Illinois, quote, "I am one of those who says, let's not shut down the government just because you don't get everything you want," end of quote. Mark Kirk, Republican governor, Republican senator, Illinois. Senator John McCain, former Republican candidate for President of the United States, quote, "In the United States Senate, we will not repeal or defund Obamacare. We will not. And to think we can is not rational," end of quote. John McCain, senator from Arizona. Senator Rob Portman, Republican of Ohio, quote, "I do think we need to deal with the underlying problem of overspending, and we have to deal with the problem of Obamacare, but those ought to be handled outside of the context of a government shutdown," end of quote. Senator Jim Risch, Republican Idaho, quote, "There isn't anybody that thinks that Obamacare is going to get defunded. It cannot happen. We were elected to govern. You don't govern by shutting down the government," end of quote. I can go on and on and on. There are many, many Republicans here in the Senate, Republicans in the House, who do not like Obamacare, but they understand that you don't shut down the government just to make a point. You don't throw 800,000 workers who work for the federal government, whose lives depend on a paycheck, out on the street in order to make a point. I think Jim Risch, Republican senator from Idaho, had it right. Let me repeat what he said. Quote, "There isn't anybody that thinks that Obamacare is going to get defunded. It cannot happen. We were elected to govern. You don't govern by shutting down the government," end of quote. Senator Risch is exactly correct. So where we are right now is that you have many Republicans here in the Senate. You have Republicans in the House. You have millions of Republicans all over this country who say we have disagreements with Obamacare. But it was passed by the United States Congress almost 4 years ago, signed by the President. When it was challenged in the Supreme Court, it was upheld as being constitutional. We had a presidential election where the Affordable Care Act was one of the major issues being debated. Obama won by 5 million votes. We had Senate races. Republicans lost 2 seats in the Senate. They lost seats in the House. And you have sensible Republicans all over the country saying, look, there are ways to deal with this issue. But you don't shut down the government. You don't punish 800,000 workers. You do not deny benefits and services to tens and tens of millions of Americans. Madam President, I just want to go on another area and to suggest to you, although I think you well understand this, that what we're seeing today in terms of the attack on Obamacare is not just some isolated act on the part of right-wing Republicans. I think many Americans really are not aware, people who may like Obamacare, may not like Obamacare. And by the way, Madam President, as you well know, today was the first day the exchanges opened. And guess what happened? Millions of people went to the website. Guess what? When you have 48 million Americans who have no health insurance and millions more who are in need, have high deductibles and co-payments, and they're given the opportunity to get insurance, shock of all shock, many of them are now going to the website. And our Republican friends say, no, no, we don't want to see that. But the point here, and I hope everybody understands this, is that this attack on Obamacare is just one small part of a right-wing extremist ideology, which is incredibly reactionary and which really intends not just to repeal Obamacare, but to repeal virtually every major piece of legislation passed in this country in the last 80 years, which protects the interest of the elderly, the children, the sick, the poor, women, the environment, people who are vulnerable. That is what their agenda is. And let me just give you a few examples. The Environmental Protection Agency works hard to make sure that the air we breathe is clean. You have many right-wing Republicans who don't want to just cut funding for the EPA. They want to abolish the EPA. We have today a major crisis in this country in terms of millions of American workers being forced to work for very, very low wages. People are working for $8 an hour. They're working for $9 an hour. You can't raise a family working on these very, very low wages. Many of us believe that it's important that we raise the minimum wage. Well, you know what the right-wing agenda is? The agenda funded by people like the Koch brothers, a family worth $70 billion, who are pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into these right-wing extremist groups. You know what they say about the minimum wage? They say, let's abolish the minimum wage. People think I'm kidding. I am not. The view now of the majority of the members, Republican members here in the Senate and the House, is not only not raising the minimum wage, it is to abolish the concept of the minimum wage. And what that means, if you are living in a high unemployment area and the wages that are being offered to you by an employer are $3 an hour or $4 an hour, those are the wages you will have to accept because there will be no federal floor. Federal floor is now 7.25, much too low, but that's what it is. Get rid of that, and you're going to have people in this country working for $3 or $4 an hour. Madam President, one of the most significant pieces of federal legislation ever passed was passed in 1935, Social Security. Today we have over 50 million Americans who are benefiting from Social Security. If you go to the Texas Republican Party platform, their recent platform, and they are one of the most powerful Republican parties in the country, they are pretty upfront about what they believe. They want to end Social Security. They want to privatize it. That is their goal. The Veterans Administration, and I speak as chairman of the Veterans Committee. Today we have quite good VA health care through 152 medical centers run by the VA, 900 community-based outreach clinics, many vet centers. VA does, most veterans consider, a pretty good job in providing health care. You know what some Republicans want to do? They want to privatize the Veterans Administration. Check it out. Texas Republican Party platform, which speaks for Republicans all over this country. Madam President, it's not just the VA and it's not just Social Security. It is many, many other programs. We recently saw our friends over there in the House cut food stamps by some $4 billion this year. That's what they believe. Meanwhile, we have more people living in poverty today than at any time in the history of the United States, and many of these guys want to make devastating cuts in Medicaid, in food stamps, and in many other programs that the most vulnerable people in this country are living on. So, Madam President, let me conclude by saying this. We could end this crisis in a very few minutes. And all that has to happen is the Speaker of the House has to bring the clean bill that we passed here in the Senate and give all of his members a chance to vote on it. And if he does that, this crisis is over. It is morally wrong and it is extremely dangerous from a precedent perspective to allow this government and our president to be blackmailed or for the American people to be held in hostage. Because if we were to succumb and surrender to that blackmail today, I can absolutely guarantee you that in 2 weeks, when the United States is going to have to pay its debts, and we don't, for the first time in the history of this country, have the money to pay our debts, and when the economists are telling us that if we don't pay our debts, there could be an international economic crisis leading to huge amounts of job loss all over the world, not just in the United States. And if we surrender to these guys right now on this issue, they'll be back. They will be back and say, well, if you don't cut this or you don't cut that, we are not going to allow you to pay the debts that the United States owes. And it will go on and on. And next year they will come back. And they may well say, well, we're not going to fund the government unless you end Social Security or unless you cut Medicaid drastically. That is not the way a government in a democratic, civilized society can operate. We have our disagreements. God only knows we have that, and we have debates, but there is a process. And what the Republicans have not yet recovered from is the simple fact that they lost the presidential election, they do not have control over the Senate, and they only have one body. And they think that controlling one body, they have a right to control the United States government. That's not how it works. So, Madam President, I would hope that people all over this country, whether they're conservatives or progressives, Democrats or Republicans, will listen to what some of the sensible Republicans right now are saying. And in essence, what they are saying, and I read many of the quotes, John McCain, many others, yeah, we have differences of opinion. And yeah, some of them disagree strongly with Obamacare. But there is a process that you go through to make those changes. You do not shut down the government, impact the entire economy, throw 800,000 people out of work, deny services to millions of Americans. That is not the way you run a government in a democratic society. So, Madam President, let me conclude by just hoping very much that the Speaker of the House will recognize that he is the Speaker of the entire House and not of just the Republican Party, and that he will let all of his members vote on the legislation that we passed right here in the Senate. With that, I yield.
Madam President, before the Senator yields the floor, could I direct it? I would ask permission to direct a question through you to the distinguished senator from Vermont.
Senator from Vermont.
Is the senator from Vermont aware of the fact that Dr. Francis Collins today announced that scores of people are being turned away, were turned away today from the nation's Institute of Health? Clinical trials. 30 little children. Clinical trials. Is the senator aware of that?
I am aware of that, Mr. Leader. And the point that you are raising, what your question speaks to, is this is not a game we are playing. When you're dealing with whether or not kids and others get treatment for cancer, what you are dealing with is life and death issues. And when you shut down the government and you shut down agencies like the National Institute of Health and our cancer research people, you are taking away life from people.
Is the senator aware, I asked through the chair, that this new gambit over there, across the hall, the House of Representatives, is the senator aware of that, of the fact that this is only another effort to defund Obamacare?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is the senator aware?
And let me just make a point to the majority leader. Today, as you know, was the first day that people could go on to the exchanges. And maybe the majority leader would like to explain to the American people that, in fact, some of these websites actually crashed because so many people came on board.
In response to my friend from Vermont, I had the good fortune of spending an hour several months ago with one of the founders of Google. And he, with a twinkle in his eye, young man still, and a big smile, talked about when they were trying to get Google started. They couldn't believe the people who wanted information, and their websites kept crashing because so many people wanted the information that they thought to which they were entitled. Around America today, millions of people, in the first few hours of the ability to sign up, rushed and overburdened a number of places the websites. This is good news for America. Good news for America. I also say these are the same people. I read a direct quote. Sorry I don't have it with me at an event I did earlier today. In 1961, Ronald Reagan talked about Medicare. That they were going, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is pretty close. If they do not stop Medicare, then his children and his children's children will look back at the day when America used to be free. Can you imagine that?
Well, what I would say to the majority leader and I was on the floor the other day just reading quotes. When Social Security was first created, we had quotes from Republicans who were talking about the end of life as we know it, slavery coming to America, same thing with Medicare. And it's interesting, I would say to the Speaker, to the Majority Leader, and that is despite all of the anti-Affordable Care Act rhetoric that we're hearing, right? You would think that nobody would be interested in getting into the program, right? And yet the first day out there, I believe over 2 million people went to the federal government's website. So I'm not quite sure why our Republican friends think that millions of Americans on the first day should not have the right to take advantage of a program that was passed here by the United States Congress.
Well, I appreciate the advocacy of my friend from Vermont for all Americans. But now this good man is chairman of the Veterans Committee. Senator Sanders is like me. I don't have a military record, or does he. But that doesn't take away from the effort that we try to make sure veterans are taken care of. And what this good man has done to protect American veterans is already, just in a short period of time, less than a year, chairman of this committee, is outstanding. It's really remarkable, and how much he cares. So I express my appreciation to the senator from Vermont.
And I want the American people also to understand that we're going to win this struggle because of the determination of the Majority Leader, who is standing up for tens and tens of millions of Americans who not only want access to affordable health care, but do not want to see our government blackmailed by a small number of right-wing extremists. So I thank the Majority Leader.
Madam President, we're going to go out in just a few minutes. But my message to the House of Representatives, to the Republican leadership of the House of Representatives, stop the games. The government is shut down. More than 70% of our intelligence community are been sent home. The National Institutes of Health. Hundreds and hundreds of people are home when they should be looking at their microscopes, trying to cure diseases in America and around the world. Everyone in the world looks at the National Institutes of Health with jealousy. It is such a remarkably good institution. President Bush said the games they're playing now, he sends these little bits and pieces over here. He will veto them. We won't allow them to pass here anyway. We want the government open. Pass the legislation to reopen government, and then they will talk about anything they want to talk about. We'll have conferences on anything they want to talk about. And one of the things we'd like to have a conference on is Senator Murray's budget. We've been trying to get a conference on that in more than 6 months. Madam President, the American people deserve more than they're getting from the House of Representatives, the so-called People's House. I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to S-Res 264.
Clerk will report.
S-Res 264, to authorize testimony, documents, and representation in State of Florida versus Lawrence, Denny, and Scarborough.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion reconsidered be laid on the table, no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes the business day, it adjourn until 10:30 a.m. Wednesday, October 2nd. Following the prayer and the pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired. Journal proceedings be approved to date. The time for the two leaders be reserved for the use later in the day, and that following any leader remarks, the Senate be in a period of morning business for debate only until noon, with time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees. The senators are permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
If there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask it adjourn under previous order.
Senate stands adjourned until 10:30 a.m.